Hi. It's been a bit since I last made a video tutorial, and this might be a bit non-standard, but in this video I want to talk about lessons about painting we can take away from how video game rendering works. I'm going to be throwing around some terms in this video because these are terms that are in use in the games industry, but also because giving a name to these ways of thinking about light can make it easier to see them and remember to keep them in mind while painting. So the first thing we'll need to care about when coloring an image is the local color, albedo, or diffuse color. This is the color we're talking about when we say that a ball is red or that gold is yellow. It's what color an object is under a kind of ideal lighting, where it's evenly lit from all sides as though it's floating in a perfectly white room. These colors are often much lighter than you would guess, so err towards brighter and less saturated colors. Most of the lighting that we paint will be multiplied over this color. Moving on to lighting, the most obvious kind of lighting is direct illumination, and we're going to paint the simplest version of it, diffuse lighting. Taking inspiration from Lambertian diffuse lighting, we're going to shade the surface of our objects based entirely off of the angle of their surface. If the surface of the object is facing towards the light source, here in the upper left, it will be bright. Areas of the surface that are facing less directly towards the light will be darker and darker until they are 90 degrees off. Beyond this angle, the surface is receiving no direct illumination, and we'll paint it black. The next kind of lighting we're going to include is called ambient lighting. This is a color that is added to the lighting for the whole scene, and represents all the light that has come from everywhere other than the direct light source. Since we don't want to deal with colors brighter than white, we'll combine the ambient and diffuse lighting with a screen blend mode rather than add. Most commonly, ambient lighting would be from the sky, though inside it's probably better to base it off of the walls or the floor. If you're having trouble eyeballing this color, it can be helpful to think of it as what lighting you would expect to fall on the object if it were in shadow. Speaking of shadows, let's add those in by projecting them out from the light source. These sorts of direct shadows can be thought of as the silhouette of the object from the light's point of view, projected onto the surface behind them. We'll multiply this over top of the direct illumination. After that, we should add in the kind of shadow for the ambient light. This is usually referred to as ambient occlusion, and it tries to account for the places that are hard for light to bounce into. These are crevices and corners that have surfaces nearby that would block light from getting in. We'll multiply this over top of the ambient illumination. Ambient occlusion shouldn't be applied over top of direct illumination, since the direct shadow pass is already accounting for that. While we're thinking about what light can bounce where, let's start trying to get some variation to our ambient illumination by taking into account the color of the surfaces that the ambient light must have bounced off of to get there. One of the simplest ways to start getting some extra variety here is to separate the ambient light into two hemispheres, a skylight and a ground light. All of the downward-facing surfaces receive bounce light from the direct lighting that hit the ground, and all of the upward-facing surfaces receive light that bounced off of the sky or off of the ceiling. If you're not sure what colors to use for this, if, say, you're painting a character portrait and there's no environment to speak of, try a bluish color for the sky color, and a warmer, darker color for the ground color. This is an extremely common lighting situation outside, and we're so used to it that seeing it looks pretty normal in most situations. In this interior shot, though, our ground light is brighter than our skylight due to the ceiling blocking all the light from the sky. To make this look even better, try to change your hemispherical lighting if there is a particularly different color nearby, like the red tablecloth, or even a light that is bouncing horizontally. The more bouncing you can account for, the richer and more subtle your lighting can be. Finally, let's talk about specular reflections. Unlike diffuse lighting, which assumes that light hitting a surface bounces equally in all directions and that the reflected light inherits the surface color that it bounced off of, specular reflections account for light that bounced off of the surface and didn't get scattered around much. These reflections don't pick up any surface color when they bounce off of most materials, so they'll be whatever color the light source is, and they don't get scattered around as much, so they tend to be much brighter than diffuse reflections. When painting these, consider the roughness of the surface. Rough surfaces like cloth or wood tend to have soft, dull reflections, while smooth surfaces tend to have sharp reflections. Also contributing here is the Fresnel reflection, which is a property that all surfaces have that make them more reflective when viewed at steep angles, so reflections near the edges of objects will tend to be brighter than those in the center, sometimes giving them a sort of rim-lit look. Some final considerations are that metallic surfaces work a little differently from nonmetals in that their specular reflections are tinted by their surface color, so light reflected in brass or gold will get tinted yellow. And some surfaces like skin or wax show significant subsurface scattering, where light will go significantly below the surface of the object and come out somewhere nearby or even go all the way through an object, making it seem to glow from the inside slightly. This glow is tinted by whatever color the material is on the inside, so for skin, this will manifest as a little bit of red light near the edges of shadows. From this point, I actually tend to flatten my colors and work on the painting as a whole, trying to keep in mind these principles, but trying to blend the various reflections and bounced lights together in order to make a more pleasing and consistent image. Following these guiding principles and with a little bit of extra rendering work, you can get some pretty good results. I hope these tips are useful for you, and that you keep them in mind when you're doing your next painting.